Hey everyone, ready to unlock the secrets to natural-sounding English grammar.
Absolutely.
Today we're diving deep into a podcast episode all about making your grammar flow effortlessly in conversations.
It's called How to Use Grammar Naturally When Speaking English, packed with practical advice.
We'll be uncovering how to sound fluent without getting lost in all those complicated rules.
Exactly.
You might even be surprised to hear that improving your grammar can be as simple as watching your favorite cooking show.
That's right. We'll be exploring all those insights and more in this deep dive.
All right, so the first big idea from this episode is that you don't need to memorize every grammar rule to speak English fluently.
Exactly. Prioritizing the grammar rules that pop up most often in everyday conversation is key.
It's like packing for a trip, right?
Hmm.
You don't bring your entire closet, just the essentials.
That's a great analogy. And when it comes to spoken English, those essentials are the grammar rules that let you talk about the past, present, and future.
So basically, I can toss out the past perfect continuous and still hold a conversation.
Well, you might need it for certain situations, but the episode argues that focusing on the present simple, past simple, and future simple will give you a strong foundation for most everyday conversations.
Okay, that's a relief.
Yeah.
I always felt like I was drowning in verb tenses. So if I just nail down those three, I'm good to go.
You'll be well on your way. The episode actually shares a story about a student who felt overwhelmed by grammar. But once they started focusing on just these basic tenses and actually using them in real life, they were able to confidently have conversations within a month.
Wow, that's amazing. It's so encouraging to hear that you don't have to be a grammar whiz to start speaking fluently.
Exactly. And that brings us to the next big takeaway from the episode: learning grammar through real-life examples.
This is where it gets really interesting. The episode basically says ditch the textbooks and start paying attention to how grammar is used naturally in the real world. They even tell a story about a student who learned the future tense, specifically the word will, just by watching cooking videos.
It's fantastic.
Can you believe that?
It's a great example of how our brains can absorb language patterns naturally, just like children do when they're learning their first language.
So you're saying that watching my favorite shows in English can actually help improve my grammar?
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be just shows. It could be movies, podcasts, music, anything you enjoy in English. The key is to start paying attention to the language and notice how those grammar rules we talked about are being used in real conversations.
So if I'm trying to master the past simple, I should listen for how people talk about things that happened in the past.
That's a great way to start. You can even make a game out of it. See how many times you can spot the past simple being used in an episode or a song.
Okay, I'm totally going to try that.
Yeah.
I love that idea of turning my favorite English content into grammar learning opportunities. So much more fun than studying textbooks.
And that's exactly the point. The more you enjoy the process, the more likely you are to stick with it. Which leads us to the next big takeaway. Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Oh yes, the dreaded grammar anxiety. I think we all struggle with that a little bit.
The episode really emphasizes that fluency is more important than perfection when it comes to spoken English.
But how can you be fluent if your grammar isn't perfect?
Well, that's the thing. The episode argues that pausing mid-sentence to overthink your grammar actually disrupts the flow of conversation more than a minor grammatical error would.
It's like trying to dance while constantly analyzing your footwork.
Exactly.
I get it. Sometimes you just got to let go and go with the flow.
Mhm.
But isn't it important to try to get the grammar right?
Of course, grammar is important. But in spoken English, the goal is to communicate effectively.
Right.
And sometimes that means prioritizing getting your message across, even if your grammar isn't perfectly polished.
They actually had a kind of funny example in the episode. Yesterday, I go to the park.
Right. Now, grammatically speaking, that's not perfect. But if someone said that to you, would you understand what they meant?
Totally. I might even say something similar in casual conversation.
Exactly. And that's the point. Sometimes a minor grammar error won't actually affect your ability to communicate effectively.
So you're saying it's okay to make mistakes?
Absolutely. The episode even shares a story about a student who was so afraid of making mistakes that they avoided speaking English altogether.
How?
Their teacher challenged them to have a 5-minute conversation without stopping to correct themselves.
Wait, so they just had to keep talking even if they made mistakes? What happened?
By the end of those 5 minutes, the student realized that most of their sentences were actually grammatically correct. And even the ones that weren't perfect were still totally understandable.
Wow, that's a really powerful story. It shows that sometimes the best way to overcome your fear of making mistakes is to just dive in and start speaking.
Exactly. And that brings us to the last key takeaway from this section of the episode. feedback is crucial.
Okay, so how do we get feedback on our spoken English?
The episode emphasizes that having someone who can point out areas for improvement is so valuable. Whether it's a teacher, a language partner, or even just a recording of yourself.
I never thought about recording myself, but that's actually a great idea.
Yeah.
I could listen back and hear where I'm making mistakes.
It's a fantastic way to become more aware of your own speech patterns. The episode also mentions a student who recorded themselves speaking and then worked with a teacher to target specific grammar points. Over time, they saw massive improvement simply because they knew exactly what to focus on.
So recording yourself and getting feedback from a teacher can really help you pinpoint those weak areas and work on them specifically.
Yeah.
What if you don't have a teacher, though?
Even just jotting down those oops moments when you realize you made a mistake can be helpful. It
Yeah.
helps you recognize patterns and focus your efforts.
So paying attention to our mistakes and trying to figure out why we're making them is just as important as learning the rules in the first place.
Exactly. It's all part of the learning process.
This has been so helpful. I'm already feeling more confident about my spoken English.
That's great to hear. And we've only just scratched the surface.
So what's next?
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore some practical tips and strategies for putting all of these ideas into action. We'll go deeper into how to practice those essential grammar rules, how to turn your favorite English content into a grammar learning adventure, and how to embrace making mistakes as part of the learning process. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We're all about speaking English with natural grammar.
Exactly.
In the last part, we talked about focusing on those core tenses. Present simple, past simple, and future simple. It can really make a difference in your fluency.
Right.
But how do we actually practice those tenses in a way that feels less like a textbook and more like real life?
Well, the source material suggests a pretty fun technique called the sentence builder.
Sentence builder.
Yeah. It's all about starting with a simple sentence and then expanding it. Kind of like building a Lego creation.
Okay, I love Legos. Tell me more.
So imagine you start with a sentence like, I ate breakfast. Super basic, right?
Yeah. But then you can start adding layers to that sentence. You could say, I ate breakfast yesterday,
Oh, yeah.
or I will eat breakfast tomorrow, using those key tenses that we discussed.
Ooh, I see. So you're basically playing around with the sentence, trying out different time frames and adding details.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could even get more specific with your descriptions. Like instead of just, I ate breakfast, you could say, I ate a delicious pancake breakfast yesterday.
That's brilliant. It's a little grammar workout for your brain, but in a way that's fun and creative.
And the best part is you can use this technique to talk about anything.
Oh.
Your daily routine, your hobbies, your dream vacation. The possibilities are endless.
So it's really about taking those basic grammar structures and making them your own, using them to talk about things that are actually relevant to your life.
Exactly. And that brings us back to another great takeaway from the source material. Ditching those textbooks and learning grammar from real-life examples. Remember that story about the student who learned the future tense just by watching cooking shows? Yeah, I still can't get over that. It's like their brain just absorbed the grammar naturally without them even trying.
It just goes to show you that learning doesn't have to be this tedious, boring process. You can pick up grammar effortlessly simply by engaging with content that you enjoy.
But how do we actually make those connections between the grammar we're learning and the English we encounter in real life? It's not like there are these flashing neon signs pointing out verb tenses in movies and stuff.
Well, you can become a grammar detective.
A grammar detective.
Yeah. Choose a show or a movie, a podcast, or even a song that you love in English. And as you're enjoying it, put on your detective hat and try to spot those key grammar patterns in action.
Okay.
See if you can find them.
So if I'm working on mastering the past simple, I could watch an episode of my favorite sitcom and pay attention to how the characters talk about events that already happened.
Exactly. You could even jot down some of those sentences or phrases that stand out to you.
Ooh, that's a great idea. It's like turning my favorite shows into personalized grammar lessons, and it makes the process so much more engaging. Like, I'm not just passively watching TV, I'm actively looking for those grammar gems.
And the more you do it, the more attuned you become to those patterns. You'll start to notice them everywhere, even in just everyday conversations.
Wow, I can already feel my inner grammar nerd getting excited. Okay, so we've talked about simplifying our grammar toolkit and learning from real-life examples. But what about the fear of making mistakes? I think that holds a lot of us back from actually speaking English confidently.
You're absolutely right. And the source material addresses this head on, emphasizing that fluency trumps perfection when it comes to spoken English. Remember that example they gave? Yesterday I go to the park.
Yeah. That one made me laugh because it's something I could totally hear myself saying in a casual conversation.
Exactly. And even though it's grammatically incorrect, it still gets the message across.
So are you saying it's okay to make mistakes?
Absolutely. It's more important to keep the conversation flowing and to actually get your meaning across than to worry about getting every single grammar detail perfect. Think of it this way. You know when you're having a lively conversation with a friend, do you stop and analyze every sentence for grammatical accuracy?
No way. That would totally kill the vibe.
Exactly. Spoken language is about connecting, expressing yourself, and engaging with others. And sometimes, a minor grammatical error won't hinder that connection at all.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better. But what about those moments when you just kind of freeze up and your mind goes blank
Yeah.
and you're so worried about making a mistake that you can't even get a word out?
The source material actually suggests a really great exercise for overcoming that fear and boosting your fluency. They call it the fluency sprint.
A sprint?
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's pretty simple but super effective.
Okay.
Set a timer for 5 minutes, pick a topic you're comfortable talking about, and just start speaking. The rule is no stopping, no correcting yourself. Just let the words flow out.
Oh, wow. It sounds like a mental workout for your speaking muscles.
Exactly. And by pushing yourself to just keep talking, you start to realize that you actually know more than you think you do.
The episode actually shared a story about a student who was so afraid of making mistakes that they would avoid speaking English altogether. But after doing this no-stopping exercise, they discovered that they were actually speaking more correctly than they thought,
Right.
and they started to feel a lot more confident.
It's amazing how much we limit ourselves with our own fears, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the best way to break through those barriers is to just dive in and see what happens.
So are you saying that making mistakes is actually a good thing?
Well, in a way, yes. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn and to improve.
Yeah.
But to really learn from those mistakes, you need feedback.
Right. In the last part, we talked about how valuable feedback can be,
Yeah.
whether it's from a teacher, a language partner, or even just a recording of yourself.
Exactly. It's like having a mirror held up to your speech, showing you those areas where you can polish and refine your grammar. And even if you don't have a teacher or a language partner, you can still get feedback by simply paying attention to your own speech.
Oh.
Notice those moments when you hesitate or you stumble or you realize you made a mistake.
So it's like becoming your own grammar coach.
Exactly. Keep a little notebook or even just use the Notes app on your phone to jot down those tricky grammar points that keep tripping you up.
That's such a practical tip. And it makes me realize that improving our spoken English isn't just about learning the rules. It's about becoming more aware of our own speech patterns and actively looking for ways to improve.
Absolutely. It's a journey of continuous learning and self-discovery.
This has been so insightful. I'm feeling inspired and motivated to really take my spoken English to the next level.
That's fantastic. And in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some specific grammar challenges that often trip up English learners. Things like articles, prepositions, and those tricky phrasal verbs. We'll give you some practical tips and strategies to tackle those grammar gremlins head on. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back to our final deep dives into natural English grammar.
We've already covered so much.
Yeah,
It's been
great.
from simplifying our grammar to embracing our mistakes. But now it's time to get super specific and tackle some of the trickiest grammar points that trip up English learners.
Definitely. Let's
Yeah.
face those grammar gremlins head on and come out on top.
Absolutely. So where do we even begin?
Well, let's start with a common culprit. Articles.
Articles, okay.
Those tiny words like oh, and,
Yeah.
and the.
Mm.
They can cause a lot of confusion, especially for learners whose first languages don't have articles.
I've definitely seen learners get tripped up by those. It seems simple, but it can be surprisingly difficult to get right.
Right. So the source material has a really interesting way of thinking about the.
They call it a spotlight.
Spotlight.
You use the when you're talking about something specific,
Exactly.
something that both you and the listener already know about.
So like if I say, I went to the store, I'm assuming the listener already knows which store I'm talking about.
Exactly. Maybe you talked about it earlier, or maybe it's the only store in your neighborhood. But if you said, I went to a store, you're not being specific. It could be any store.
That's a great way to put it. It's like the shines a light on that particular store. What about A and N?
So you use those when you're introducing something for the first time or talking about something in general.
Okay.
And remember, N goes before words that start with a vowel sound.
Right. So an apple but
Yeah.
a banana. Got it. All right, articles decoded. What's next?
Let's move on to prepositions. Those words like on, in, at, to, from, that tell us about location, time, and direction.
Ah, yes. Prepositions. Definitely one of those things that make you wonder, why is English so complicated?
Yeah, they can be tricky, but the source material suggests thinking of prepositions as like spatial relationships. They help us create a picture in our mind of where things are in relation to each other.
So if I say, the book is on the table, I'm telling you about the position of the book.
Exactly. And I'm going to the store, you're describing the direction you're moving in.
Right, like those prepositions are drawing a map in our heads.
Exactly. Now let's talk about another challenge. Verb conjugation. Making sure the verb matches the subject, in terms of tense and number.
Ah, yes. The infamous subject-verb agreement.
Ugh.
It definitely gave me a run for my money when I was learning English.
It trips a lot of people up. But the source material gives us a great tip. Always identify the subject of the sentence first. Who or what is doing the action?
So, and the cat chases the mouse, the cat's doing the action, so we use chases. But if it's the cats chase the mouse, then we use chase, because it's plural.
Exactly. It seems easy enough. But it's so easy to make mistakes when you're speaking quickly or dealing with complicated sentences. Just taking a moment to figure out the subject can make all the difference.
Right, like a mini grammar check before you hit the send button on your sentence.
Okay, I'm ready for the big boss. What's next?
You ready for phrasal verbs?
Oh no, not phrasal verbs. They're like the final hurdle in English grammar.
Yeah. I know they can be a little intimidating.
It's like they have their own secret language.
Right. So we've got these combinations of verbs and prepositions like look up or put on or take off. And the tricky part is that they often have several meanings. And sometimes the literal meaning is totally different from the actual meaning. So the source material emphasizes that the best way to master phrasal verbs is to just learn them as individual units of meaning.
Okay.
Don't try to figure out the logic. Just memorize them like any other vocabulary word.
So instead of trying to break down look up, I should just learn that it can mean search for information or admire someone. Exactly. The more you see those phrasal verbs in action, the more natural they'll become.
It's like we're building up a phrasal verb vocabulary bank.
Yeah.
And remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Even native English speakers mess up phrasal verbs sometimes.
Oh, yeah, they definitely do.
Phew. Good to know we're not alone in that struggle. Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive, and I have to say, I feel much more confident and ready to take on those grammar challenges.
That's great to hear. We've learned that speaking English fluently and naturally isn't about being perfect.
Yeah.
It's about focusing on the most important grammar points, learning from the real world, being okay with making mistakes and getting feedback.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely. So tell me, what's one grammar point you're going to work on this week? How will you use what we've talked about?
Yeah. How you level up your spoken English grammar. Keep practicing, exploring, and enjoying the wonderful world of language. Until next time, happy speaking.